shine through your word. May we be changed. Amen. Please sit down. So, this probably caught your attention for this week. And we'll dig into that. I hate evangelism and I feel guilty. Framing it so far, we're now in week 5 and we've had these 4 weeks of what it is to follow the rabbi and what that looks like. And then last week we looked at what it is to be in an unconditional covenant with God and really focusing on God entering that covenant with us. And I hope you are enjoying it so far. This week, though, I hate evangelism and I feel guilty. So when I say the word evangelism, not a treaty, I want you to tell me what you feel when I say that. We're supposed to go evangelize. What do you feel when I say that? Help. Help. What else? Inadequate. Thank you. Yeah. Shy? Yeah. What else? Can I do it? Yeah. Manipulative? Yep, I can understand that. Anyone else? Power? Okay. Next.
Here I am, Lord, send Michael.
Send the professional. What else? Anything else? Do you know what? You're so not alone. The Southern Baptist Convention, probably the most aggressive with the gospel of any of the denominations in our 5 English-speaking nations. They cannot gather for a birthday party without giving you the summed up 4-point gospel. It is just against the rules. They can't do it. In fact, we're sharing Ash Wednesday with Avonhead Baptist, and I told Bruce, it's like, look, we're not going to be doing a 4-point presentation this night, and he's been a missionary, so he gets it. One of the challenges with the Southern Baptists is they actually are very intentional, which is great. The challenge, though, is when they look at themselves, they've had to admit some really hard truths. That only 2% of any Southern Baptist has ever shared their faith with anyone. That's pretty hard for the Baptist to admit. And it's difficult, and you have to stop and you have to ask why. Why do we face that, and what is that? When we left Wellington and went to New Orleans after the storm, this isn't a photo from that. I never took a photo. I actually should have. But I remember on a corner in a community with lots of open ground behind it. It looked a lot like the parts of Christchurch that have been red zoned and cleared. You know, just the beginnings of driveways there in the curb, and that's it. It looked a lot like that. And I remember seeing this tent set up with all the little metal folding chairs that looked just like that. And they were having a revival that night. And you had the people in that part of New Orleans that if they were there, they were living in little caravans indefinitely. You couldn't get any more irrelevant than that. I actually went by later that night. They had strung up power with a generator, the sound of that in the outback. And there were maybe 7 people there, the people hosting it. But they went through with it, and they played their music, and the preacher got up there with his Bible and flew it like a bird, you know, with it flapping. And it did nothing. Anybody ever drive down to the intersection of Rickerton and Deans? You know exactly what I'm referring to, don't you? That fellow who sits there with a poster and a table and a chair. I love the commitment. I love the desire. But it's just not effective, is it? This bringing of the word from a time and in a way that is just absolutely foreign to today. But we feel this is the way we're supposed to do it, don't we? We feel that even though we've spent these last decades in post-Christendom, We still have this inherited model, even if nobody ever says it, that we're supposed to tell people about Jesus, but in a way that they can't understand and they certainly don't resonate with. You see, in this era, preaching the gospel was a transfer of information. If we can just tell them the truth, then they'll respond. And if they don't, then they actually deserve to go to hell. We didn't say those words, but how many of you, that's actually how it feels we do it. Aye. We had to prove the truth, the reliability of Scripture. We were in an era where we had to establish the legal ultimate truth that Jesus died and rose from the dead and that he was God's Son. We felt we had to sit there and argue it. I went past a church this week, I will not tell you which one. They had on there, God's truth never changes and that settles it, something along those lines. Who was that sign to? I think it probably makes them feel good, but they put it out on the street for everybody who drives by. And I've learned this great phrase since becoming a Kiwi. Well, that's not helpful, is it? We had this idea that bringing the gospel, we either did it with honey or a hiding. We made him feel guilty, or we had to attract him somehow. We had to be as good as everything the world offers us. Someone handed me a little flyer today from another church, came in the mail. I appreciate it. I appreciate that this church is making an effort to connect with the culture. And it was a photo, it was one of those cards like that. It was a photo like, of the stage, and there was great downlighting and uplighting and about 7 to 10 singers up there, and it looked great, trying to compete with the culture's idea of cool. Now, I'm not attacking that, but there's an idea that we have to compete with the world and establish that we're relevant. But this idea that we hate evangelism, and I think as Anglicans we probably hate that idea the most. We can probably guarantee it's not 2% for us. Is that there's this feeling that we're supposed to approach people, be they family or strangers, and just start answering these questions that they're not asking and establish this argument that they're not fighting. And it just feels so artificial in all the things you just said. And we all hate it. There's something missing. A credibility, an earned right, an understanding of the person's context and who they are in the story that we don't know. And we actually don't feel competent or confident to do it, which came out with several of the responses. I used to teach courses back when Laidlaw was Bible colleges in New Zealand. I used to do some adjunct courses for them. We're going back a day or two. And it was really interesting because the courses that I did were ongoing professional development courses. I did it for several denominations, what used to be the Apostolics and the Vineyards and the New Lifes and all those folks. Occasionally the Baptists, even the Prezzies, never the Anglicans back in those days. And it was really interesting because in the first couple of days of this week-long intensive these pastors would go through, they would get so excited of this new way of being the church. The stuff that I've been banging on about for 6 months now. The stuff that in the Following the Rabbi you've been picking up on. But about day 3, it shifted every time. They quite often were about my age or a little bit older. And suddenly they realized they were inadequate, not confident, and they often felt incompetent to lead a church into a new way of what it is to follow Jesus and love our friends and neighbors. It was much easier to preach It was much easier to proclaim the gospel. It was much easier to organize programs than it was to go be salt and light and the fragrance of Jesus. And you know what was sad is that they often would resign themselves that, well, the way I've done it for all these decades will work until I'm done, and we can leave that to the next generation. Right now, today, we have about a dozen teenagers who come to youth group. If we follow the stats, 9 of the 12 will leave the church upon leaving secondary school within a year or two. And they'll never come back. That's what the statistics tell us. Barna Research has studied across the Western world and the developing world, and scarily the stats are the same. Now, if that's the case, 30 years from now, we'll have 3 adults in their 40s in our church. The old way of being the church isn't working and hasn't worked for a long time. If you would, grab your Bibles there. Go to page 902, the first passage that Denise read for us. And I actually want to spend a little time in the scripture. Now, I'm using the NIV UK, but the translations are so close where the words are different. Hopefully it'll help fill it out. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens. That's weeks and months back in the day. That's not waiting on an afternoon flight. He was there for weeks and months waiting on the others who were joining him there. He was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. He spent time going around and exploring it. He was reading the context. When we were part of that mission for a number of years as a missionary, one of the things we would do with young leaders is teach them to spiritually map the city. And we would take them to another very different city, like a San Francisco, and have them spend several days doing a spiritual map of the city. Who is the city? Why does it have the personality it does? What's its story? What are its challenges? What's the church's story here in history? And then we would take them back to where we were and teach them to read that context. Because once you get out of your context and grab the skills, it's easier to come back into a context that you breathe every day and you don't even realize you're breathing a culture. Let me tell you, coming from Wellington, Christchurch is a very different city. Could be in a different country. They're very different places. Paul did the same. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day. This went on for a while of having conversations, one-on-one, small groups, cup of tea, hanging out with them as they worked, early in the morning, late in the evening as they wrapped it up. This group of people came to debate with him there, verse 18. And he was, and you see the word preaching, and you think large crowd. He was sharing with them and telling them. And it was a dialogue. And it went on. And then the Areopagus, you said it much better than I did. I took Greek and I can't say the word. But it literally, I missed a slide. That's it. That place, that Areopagus, whatever it is, that's the place today. It's quite a big hill, isn't it? With a lot of buildings on it. And this is where all these people would go up there and talk about these ideas. Obviously, these would have been the people of means because they had the time to do such things. But he would go up there and he would wrestle these ideas with all the minds who thought about stuff. Now, I don't know what kind of courtyard or piazza or what he sat in when he did that. But they wanted to know, and these were strange ideas to them. In verse 20, the end, we would like to know what they mean. And then in verse 21, you get this commentary that they like to naff on and have these conversations, but they aren't serious about them. That's basically what verse 21 says, eh? And then Paul stood up in a meeting. So now he's in a large place and he starts to proclaim. And he gets to that part, that famous part of the statue of the unknown God. And what I want you to catch from that is he found a bridge. They have this idol of this unknown God. They don't understand it. And he uses that bridge, having spent some time there with them now. He understands them. And he begins to proclaim the truth of Jesus in a way that they can understand on their terms. After he's earned the right. On their turf, on their terms, in their time, on their topics, having earned their trust. And down at verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it, the Lord of heaven, does not live in temples built by human hands. And he goes on to unpack it. Something very different for them. He wasn't attacking their idols. He simply said, I'm proclaiming the living God. Doesn't live in a building. Not some stone or wood statue. Not in one location. Gives everyone life and breath. And at verse 27, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him. And he goes on to explain it, and then you come to that lovely end. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was these people by name. And notice that the first one he mentions is a woman. It's interesting, very specific, very detailed. And if you would turn to 7-8 something, whatever that page was, for the other passage, the Matthew passage. And I just want to highlight the terms. Verse 13, this is Matthew 5, by the way, starting at verse 13. Matthew 5. 780 something, wasn't it? 786, thank you. You're salt, and if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? You are light. You don't put the light under a bowl, but you put it on a stand. In the same way, you're light. Let your light be shown. And your good deeds glorify your Father in heaven. Now look, you put in just a touch of salt, you can't really taste it, eh? You ever put it in the dish that you're making and can't really taste it? Okay, a little bit, but not quite just right. When you use too much salt, you end up preserving things. I think that's McDonald's burgers. They're preserved forever. But it was such a valuable thing. When I did a pilgrimage following Patrick's life, I went to this Iron Age village where the people lived into the characters of that age, 2,000 years ago. And the currency was salt, because it was so hard to come by, but yet so vital to life. Because if you wanted anything to last, you wanted meat to not kill you, you used salt. Salt can also be used to cleanse. But if it loses its saltiness, it's nothing. But just right. And it's so savory. And light. Light's amazing. In the darkest night, when January we went down to the dark sky area near Tekapo, and we're out in there, particularly as you got close to Mount Cook and that big lake there. How do you say that lake? Pukeki. See, I told them. My wife said I'm wrong with that. And I said, no, it's Pukeki. No, you're wrong. It's even spelled different. No, it's not. It wasn't a row. It was an emotional conversation. Absolutely zero light. Anywhere. Black, dark night. And then miles away, you could see the tiny headlights that were just one light. They were so far away. But in that darkness, your eyes were drawn to the light. A lot of people bemoan the state of our culture and society and the way it's going and its godlessness. I do. I'm with you. But the darker the night, the brighter the light. What a time we have to be God's people in this day and age. What an opportunity we have in a world that doesn't know him. You see, all the stuff I've been talking about these weeks comes down to this. Rather than proclaiming information and winning an argument, rather than trying to entice them in because we're so cool, rather than trying to guilt them in because they're going to burn in hell forever, you never saw Jesus do it that way. You didn't see his followers do it that way. And when the gospel is spread so powerfully, that's not how it's spread. It's spread with a salt and a light and that intoxicating sweet fragrance. Heather, sweet olive, jasmine, the soft smell of roses on a spring breeze. It's about a relationship that reads the context. Do you remember when I talked about the line, the person way over here far from God, and they move along that journey one step at a time, often over 6 years with 6 friends? A relationship that reads them and reads the context and finds out where the bridges of connection and good news are. Now, that's not hard. You all do it every day. New Zealand is a complex culture, much more complex than the Germans or the Dutch or the Yanks or the Aussies, and a touch more complex than the English. What we don't say is so important, but yet Kiwis read all the unspoken so well. Hey, you know what I'm talking about. We do. We sit there and we're reading the unspokens. Oh, she was upset. I never picked up on it. And then my wife explains how she read that. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I did notice that. We read and understand and we listen. The word and the deed. The deeds are important. They need to taste and see that God is good. What Faye and the team are doing. What mainly music's doing. Man, they're knocking sixes. It just continues to grow and lives are impacted and they're connecting in deeper. And Sarah's strategically thinking about how she makes the next steps and links it. But the words are equally important. This is a guy named NF. That's his stage name. His real first name is Nathan, the N. And he does these raps that you now hear on the secular radio. But if you listen, they're all pointing to him. You see, I doubt anybody in this room appreciates rap. I get it. I pretend I like it sometimes, if it's somebody like Nathan here. But there's something interesting about this. You see, I'm going to read what I wrote. Rappers are today's poets. They explain and express what the society is experiencing, feeling, sensing, has angst over. The disharmonious nature reflects the bankruptness of our society. The disappointment shouldn't be at the rappers, but on who we as society have become. They translate what's being experienced and felt. And the stuff that we don't like in the secular world of rap tells you how thirsty they are and how they long for something more. See, bringing a culture isn't some cartoon epitaph or a sign on the front of a church. It's not some bleeding on in a tent on a street corner to try to guilt people towards Jesus. It's a journey that you already do so well. This is one baking church. I've never been in a church that you call for food. I got to go buy new clothes because they're not fitting anymore. You know how to love people and you do it and you've been doing it a long time. And when you've invested all this time, the simple things of, I'm so sad to hear that. I don't have any words, but I will be praying. How is that going? Have you heard anything? I'm still praying. You do a Robin. This sounds crazy, but I want to pray for you right now. What can I pragmatically do to really help? No, don't. How can I lighten the load and the burden you're carrying right now? Here's something I want you to get really clear. There was a time when the church communicated this, and hear this, because we communicate it sometimes. I'm not saying I'm saying we, the church, do this, is that you have to behave before you can belong. And if you really want to belong, you have to believe just like us. So you have to behave before you believe, before you can belong. Do you know what I mean by that? Oh, he smokes. Oh, look at the way he dresses. Oh, look at his hair. Listen to how he talks. We subtly put these conditions on someone. I want to tell you a story about a guy. True guy. I'm not going to share his name. New Zealand's too small. I had gone to the church in Masterton, the big one, St. Matthew's. Masterton. It's kind of the Minster church for that archdeaconry. Bigger, lots of congregations. And this fellow showed up my third Sunday. And he sat in the back right corner. I can still see where he sat back there. And he had on one of those dark blue, but the really high-vis reflective stuff on it. You know what I'm talking about? Bits of orange and all that. He had one dreadlock, about down to here. Not braided dreadlock. And that means you never wash it. I don't get that. But, okay. His teeth weren't perfect. He had tattoos everywhere. His clothes were mussed. He needed a shave. And he sat way back in the corner. And of course, being me, looking just like I do right now, beelined for him before we had begun the service, made his acquaintance, chatted with him, talked to him, said how glad he was here. Hey, we're having this lunch afterwards. Please stay. It would be great to get to know you, spend some time with you. Went on up there. He heard me natter on and do what I do in a service. And then he stayed. He had some chat. Some other people, some other cool nanas and grandpas who don't dress the coolest and don't listen to the right music and certainly don't have tattoos on their neck. Had a chat up with him. And I thought, well, we'll never see him again. He was back the next week. And the next. And then the next week, Bishop Justin was coming to speak. You know, like we've got Bishop Peter coming. And that was a different bishop for a guy like this to see. And he stayed for lunch. And at that lunch, sitting on a pew along the side of the hallway, I sat there, I ate lunch with him. And he goes, I want to tell you something. Brace. He goes, I've been testing you. What do you mean? I came looking especially rough the first few weeks. Okay. Just to see if you'd accept me, because I actually didn't think you would. I thought you'd judge me. I thought I would need to behave a certain way before I could belong. And I'd have to believe like you before I could really belong. His words. His words. The next week his family came. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat around his table. I can't tell you the number of times I've watched this fellow really sacrificially inconvenience himself to go out of the way to love and bless other people in the church and outside. I can't tell you how many times he's been the gatekeeper who brought people along. Because you see, when we turn that upside down, we start doing it the Jesus way. Think about who Jesus hung out with. The Zacchaeuses, the Mary Magdalens. He had this reputation for always being with the sinners and going to their parties and eating with them and hanging out with them. But yet, we all think it's some kind of hocus pocus that all of these people became the people that we revere today. And it wasn't because he sat there and won an argument with them. They could taste and see and smell. I'll tell you a little funny thing I did coming in this morning. I got in my car. My car picks up the Bluetooth from my phone and starts playing music. Before I got in, I was walking around the corner of the garage to put something in the bin, and I'd started the car, and I walked back and I said, God, I just really want a time with you on the way in this morning. Whatever the Bluetooth chooses, maybe you could just guide it and it could be the right thing. You ever do that with God? Come on. I actually expected something really loud and not 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning music. And this song came on by a Christian band called The Brilliance. And the song was His Hands and Feet. It's a very contemporary song. It's not an old hymn. But the whole thing was, we're His hands, we're His feet. We are the body. We are the temple. We're the place people will taste and see. They don't have to go up to the Areopagus, the big hill. They just need to walk along with you. You don't have to feel the guilt of breaking out of tract. You just got to be you. Your words, as you rap Jesus, need to explain your actions. Your actions need to give life to the words. And if you're open and you sense and you wait and you listen, they'll smell it, they'll see it, they'll taste it, and the conversations will happen. And if you're listening to the Spirit, He'll guide you, and it won't feel awkward. You won't feel inadequate. You may feel it and sense it, but your kindness and your gentleness and your words will be powerful. There's a place for people who wear this and go into the supermarket. I've had conversations in supermarkets here. Last one was in Bishopdale last week. Somebody approached me. Horrible trauma going on in their life. Just wanted me to pray. But you're the map readers. You're the light along Lake Pukeki. You're the salt that preserves and seasons and flavors. You're the smell of sweet olive and jasmine on a summer morning. You need to believe that. Believe.